Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to see you. What a beautiful intro. Thank you so much. Great to be with you all tonight, particularly in this amazing space. We have a great panel planned for you, and we are going to look at growth opportunities in the North and South, and with a special focus on how do you expand and grow, but also sustain and protect. So let me bring out our panelists right now. Graciela Chichilinsky is the CEO of Global Thermostat. Your company is capturing carbon from the air with newly refined technology. Tell us about what you're doing at Global Thermostat.
Yes, it was in The Guardian yesterday, so people can read about it in London. And it received recently the award as the world's top 10 most innovative company in energy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we feel it's getting some recognition, but what you said is right. We take carbon from the atmosphere, where it is a major liability, bring it down and sell it for profit, where it's a massive profit opportunity. So we transform a liability into an asset. And that is a business model that didn't exist before. But everything that I heard today, right now fits very well into this. It is technology. It fits into the challenges of the limitation of resources in the planet and the concerns about climate change, lack of water, and biodiversity extinction, and perhaps human extinction, some coming down the line. So we can do both things at the same time, and the knowledge society that was mentioned is critical to that. I wanted to say, let's not get ahead of ourselves, because 70% of the exports of Latin America, not Mexico, Latin America, are raw materials. And this is the year 2015. And this is partly why Latin America has not advanced like Asia. So, as was said by Jose, by Mark, by you, the opportunity right now is enormous, and there is an understanding for this. We need to transform the likes of Global Thermostat, which are the companies of the global economy, into sources of exports and jobs in the US based on our fantastic technology. Our company has 16 US patents, and it has our plans in Silicon Valley at the Stanford Research Institute. I was born in Argentina, and I see the opportunity in exporting carbon-negative power plants to Latin America, so that the power sector, which is so critical because it identifies development, can clean the atmosphere instead of polluting it. It's exactly what you're saying. This is the moment where everything is changing, and this is one of the changes.
Well, this is a conversation that we really want to be interactive and just have a dialogue about. So I guess that I come back to my initial question and ask, can this be done? You're talking about these resources that are so important for growth for the planet. We're talking about water, food, knowledge, and yet we're also talking about business expansion ideas. Jose Manuel, one of your main goals at Pemex is to increase infrastructure and increase production. Can you do that in a practical way while also protecting the environment?
Certainly, Maria. Let me give you a practical example that we're doing in Pemex. And it has to do with what Graciela was mentioning, which has to do with how we can reconvert the power system in Mexico into a more sustainable power system.
Yes.
For example, Mexico is transforming its power industry from using as feedstock fuel oil and diesel, switching that to natural gas, which is a much cleaner and much more efficient fuel than in the past. Along with, and we're incorporating as well cogeneration projects and also renewable energy projects as well. So all this is coming together in the national grid. Now, just to give you a pragmatic example, Pemex used to be one of the largest consumers of power in Mexico, and we used to consume 6% of power. Just by switching from dirty fuels to cleaner fuels, we will become from being the net demand of 6% to a net supply of 9% of power. So Pemex will become a net power generating system in Mexico, with much cleaner and much energy efficient, and with a much smaller carbon footprint in the economy. That's the kind of things we're thinking about, of how we can get cleaner energy to consumers, but also to the industry that requires.
These are hard issues. The world is becoming more urban, right? Population growth is happening outside of the United States. What do you think, Mike? I mean, do you think that this, Mike and Mark, can this happen? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, you don't want to be Pollyannish. These are big challenges, but smart people of goodwill who are willing to use science and know-how and business acumen to address these challenges one by one, there's reason to be encouraged. For example, across Latin America and in Mexico, one of our goals is, Latin America is going to be the world's breadbasket. So one of our goals is to see Latin America double food production with no net loss of habitat. So the historic pattern would be to expand agriculture by clearing forests. All kinds of bad things happen with that, right? It's bad for climate, bad for biodiversity, you name it. We want to protect these forests. But there's a better way. You can use already cleared land. There's a lot of cleared land, and the agricultural expansion can be directed that way. Now, why has that land been cleared? Because it was cleared for ranching. So you say, well, will the ranchers then deforest? No, we're learning how to sustainably intensify ranching. And so you get better ranching results with less land. And the know-how is already there, so now it's just a matter of sharing those best practices in the smartest and most effective way. That's why we like working with business people, because businesses know how to scale things up. Jose mentioned infrastructure. Latin America actually has a pretty small carbon footprint because they've relied so much on hydropower. So dams are great in the sense that it's green energy, clean energy. But there are a lot of bad things that go with dams too, and we now much better understand that. So now organizations like TNC with governments and the infrastructure builders, we want to get in there early, again, plan carefully, and try to design these dams in a way where you can have the best of both worlds, and you can do it. Get the benefits of clean energy, but do so with much less environmental impact. It takes players of goodwill, businesses who want to do the right thing, good government leaders. You need rules against bad actors. There are some bad actors out there. So it's a little bit complicated. So people have to make this happen, we need to learn to collaborate in coalitions at scale and in a hurry. But I think we can pull that off. That's what all of our organizations are doing.
Well, the other thing is you're balancing different economies and different mentalities, right, Mike? I mean, you've got, Mexico and South America, very different than Canada and the United States.
Well, they couldn't be more different in some respects. I just mentioned one earlier in my remarks in terms of the penetration of technology and things like the internet. I represent a multinational CEO, so I am sometimes viewed as the bad guy.
Right.
But I can tell you that in the last 5 years, our company, and we're a pretty big company, has invested serious resources and time in these issues. Not just because folks like Mark have great arguments, because they generally do, or because politicians and regulators tell us we have to. It's because it's important. It's important to our consumers, our employees, our shareholders. We're on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We're in the FTSE for Good Index. We've committed to reducing our carbon footprint by 15% a year for the next 5 years. And it's not hard to do. We actually did it 34% last year just by looking at our data centers. You're consuming yours in drilling our data centers, which deliver the internet to our customers, are massive power machines. So it's not hard to do, and we will do it for certain. It's good business. But I will raise one word of caution, and you kind of said it at the end of your remarks, Mark. We worry about aggressive political and regulatory action that isn't well thought out because if we embrace the idea as capitalists in a commercial manner, that's the best way to do it. Sometimes regulators can get ahead of themselves or push on particular platforms or issues. That's dangerous for us because we don't want a disincentive to invest. And sometimes, that can happen with overregulation or impractical regulation. It becomes a disincentive for investment. And what we need to achieve everything that the folks on this panel want to achieve is investment. Don't kid yourself. Nobody on this panel achieves a single thing without an investment dollar behind them or a peso or whatever the currency is. And as soon as that chills, as soon as people worry, and that dries up, then none of this happens.
This is a critical point, and in fact, this has been the story in business for the last several years. And companies saying, look, we have to hold back, we have to pull back because of the regulatory environment. So how do you balance this when you know that the pendulum has in fact swung? When you look at the EPA, and it's not just the EPA, but maybe it's Dodd-Frank or other regulations that have kept investing at bay.
Well, if I may, I want to sound a word of caution. We sound very optimistic here, but the situation is quite dire with respect to the global environmental resources. As you said, air, water, and food, the most basic elements of survival. However, we have found new market-oriented policies in the creation of the carbon market, which is right now trading over $350 billion in the European Union emission trading system. In the US, it exists in California, which is the 8th largest economy in the world. So it does exist, and in the US, we now have limits on stationary sources that are the basis for that market. This is a market-oriented policy. I actually wrote the carbon market into the Kyoto Protocol, and the idea is that by creating these markets, you can orient capitalism and the transformation of capitalism in a way that we can conserve these critical resources that are needed for human survival. So it is true what Marx says, you can do both things. It is true, but it's extremely difficult. People don't understand how the new policies that create market structures encourage investment in a different direction, and they blend capitalism with environment, but the challenge is enormous. For example, this year in December, there will be the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations, which are the global negotiations on climate. It happens in Paris in December. The US doesn't have a position. The Pope has written an encyclica about how close this is to the point of no return for the survival of the human species, and how closely connected it is to poverty in Latin America, where he's from, and in other parts of the world. Do we know how to deal with that? I pick anybody in this audience, and I think you will find yourself a little bit unable to respond to this question. It is possible. My firm is combining capitalism with the cleaning of the atmosphere and making profits out of that. We are dealing with the largest power producers as our clients commercially in the United States. But we don't have a position. We need, as a country, we need the participation of the State Department, the participation of the Treasury Department, the executive branch, to participate in these global negotiations and to have a solution. Do we have one?
So for example, when you saw the most recent trade talks, was this a conversation piece in the most recent trade talks? Was this on the agenda?
Maria, you couldn't be more on the spot. You couldn't be more right. Let me explain. GATT, and of course the World Trade Organization, does not include the carbon market. Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, the largest 6 power companies in the world, energy companies I should say, and this includes Statoil, Total, Shell, I believe Exxon, 6 of them have come and recommended to the United Nations that the carbon market should be made stronger, larger, more, in a public, strong public request. So business does understand what Jose was saying, even though Jose's company, Pemex, was not in the list.
No, not yet.
She's challenging you.
But she's right. I mean, at the same time, business understands that. We are moving in that direction. It is possible, but it's not happening. So the situation is one of great danger and great opportunity.
Mark.
I think Graciela is right, and it's interesting she mentions the Pope. The Pope's encyclical is really interesting. His commentary on climate science and the need to act, I think most environmentalists were really happy to see him say those things, and we agreed. But if you read the whole document, the Pope then goes on, quite different than this panel. We think of, we're an environmental organization, TNC, that thinks capitalism can be a friend of the environment. The Pope said the opposite. And I think it's really quite a challenge for us. The Pope said, and I'm sure he had in mind those poor people in the church's most important countries. He said capitalism is the enemy. And it's sort of a wake-up call, I think. We folks who believe markets can be solutions, we better get our act together and get moving and address all these challenges, because there's another school of thought that's a head-on blow for us businesses.
I'll be not a contrarian, but I might switch it up here a little bit, because we have been talking principally about the environment and energy and things of that nature. I would pose the question, is it the most important thing? Is it the most important topic to return to growth in Latin America, to get back to the 5, 6, 7% growth of the next 10 years?
And create jobs.
I would say not. Now, that might be controversial. I didn't realize we were going to be principally an environmental panel. I should have looked at who was on. But I would just, and not to take away from any of the great things that you do, Mark, because I love them, and you know I do, and you also, Graciela. They're very innovative and incredibly important. But are they the most important things that we need to take advantage of the opportunity, as you said earlier? I don't know. I mean, I look at education in Latin America. We heard about that last night. 40% don't finish secondary school. We've got issues around diversifying the economy. It's heavily dependent on commodities. Productivity increases aren't happening. There's no manufacturing. We have NAFTA, which is terrific, but we also have 58 free trade agreements in the region, which conflict and contradict and create hubs and spokes that don't always work. So there's lots of things that I would suggest, maybe we can talk about them or not, I just put that out there, that could also be very impactful for change in the region, in addition to what we've been talking about.
Especially if the priority is growth and job creation.
Correct. And why isn't there a Facebook in Latin America being created? You are very innovative, Graciela. That's incredible, the things you're doing, but there are not very many people like you in that region. We need innovation. You need technology investment. You need, to decentralize and deregulate some of these monopoly industries, as is happening in Mexico. A huge change. I was just in Mexico last week. It's incredible what's happening in telecom infrastructure and in energy. Those kind of things can be impactful overnight. And I would suggest, we should maybe broaden the conversation.
Absolutely, totally agree. Alicia.
And maybe just to push a little bit more on Mike's issues and what he's putting on for us to discuss. When you look at this year's list in Forbes of the 50 most disruptive companies that there is, there's not a single company from Latin America. And when we talk about disruption and how you generate those learning opportunities, you have to look at what goes on the rest of the world. And when you look at those lists and not a single Latin American company is on them,
why is that? Is that because of what Mike has been bringing up, lack of education?
I think it has to do a lot with educational opportunities. It has to do a lot of this belief on innovation and entrepreneurship. I think we are a culture that does not promote entrepreneurship and innovation. We have not had our countries grow because of innovation. And that's a huge challenge looking forward. And so when you talk about growth and sustainable growth during the next decades, you have to talk about innovation and learning opportunities. And I think those are the real challenges. But there's a huge opportunity right now in Latin America, just looking at the demographic bonus. There's a huge opportunity, but there's also, and this could also be a time bomb, because this huge, huge number of young people in Latin America need opportunities.
Yeah, half the population is under the age of 27.
One out of every 5 of them are neither work nor study. And this is just going to grow if we do not generate those job opportunities. And I think entrepreneurship and innovation has to be one of those mechanisms to generate those. And I think there's a huge opportunity to do this because of technology. I think connectivity is the great enabler to generate those educational opportunities for all. So that's why I'm optimistic, because there's a demographic bonus that we have to take advantage of by generating those learning opportunities for all through connectivity. I'm a firm believer that that's the only way we're going to generate life-changing opportunities for many in Latin America.
And we know the alternative. If we don't do that, we will have social unrest and protesting and who knows what, because there is no hope. There is no vision of opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. But I wanted to answer what Alicia is saying in the context of what Mike says and what Mark said. There are no two schools of thoughts. Well, there are. Mark is right. Is capitalism the problem, as you read the Pope to say, yes, but no. Because, yes, because capitalism is transforming itself. By the way, capitalism is always transforming itself. But right now, it's transforming itself in a big way. What is missing in Latin America is not educated people. I came from Buenos Aires, and without going to college, I went directly to a PhD in mathematics at MIT, which I was very good at. And that was happening because the high schools in Argentina are great, but the poverty in Argentina is also great. And the lack of financial markets is what prevents entrepreneurship, because risk capital, and I don't have to talk to Mark about that, because coming from Goldman Sachs, he knows what I'm talking about. Risk capital is critical for innovation. We're not talking about creativity, which is great. We're talking about making money out of creativity, which is what my company is about. For that, you need good financial markets. Do we have them? No. The creativity is there, the intelligence is there, the poverty is there, the basic needs have to be satisfied for people. And we do face contradictions. The contradiction that you explained for the Pope is that the capitalism is the problem so far for the creation of environmental limits that we're facing that could lead to the extinction of the human species. Yes, but capitalism being the problem has to be part of the solution. The creation of new global markets, like the carbon market, is actually, like the gas and oil companies are saying, the solution. We need new global markets. We need financial access for entrepreneurship and innovation in Latin America. And we need the new capitalism to replace the old. So the Pope is not right, but he missed the new part of it, because he doesn't know. But you know that financial markets are the answer, not the problem. Am I wrong?
No, I agree. I mean, and back to Mike's comments about how we should broaden this conversation. The thing is, these things all go hand in hand. So you guys talked about needing more entrepreneurs, better financial markets, better education systems, and with my narrower conservation hat, we need those things too, because those are going to be the people and the institutions and the tools that unlock the progress that we want. So I guess the question for all of us then is, how do we get on with it and make these good things happen, right?
And what are you doing? I mean, Alicia is creating online content for young people. You're looking at coding. You're looking at engineering. You're looking at the industries that you believe are the industries that are growing for tomorrow.
And exactly one of the issues is we don't know where the opportunities are going to be the next 10 years.
Right.
We know that we have to develop people with 21st century skills. That we know, and we have to push that really hard. We have to push our boundaries to get those 21st century skills to many, because capital is one of the issues that is needed. But in order to absorb that capital, you need human capital. And when we talked about trade and we began talking about trade was about resource allocation. A knowledge society is about people. It is about people. That's the
right.
huge difference. We are talking about transforming people. And there's an economist, Stiglitz, who just wrote a wonderful book on learning societies. And the conclusion is very optimistic from this economist, because he says it takes a longer time for resource allocation and resource creation in developing countries that it'll take the time to bridge or lessen the gap in the learning society if we do the correct things. So for me, that is real optimism. Economists are talking about how do you generate and close those gaps in terms of knowledge. That might be easier to close than the resource allocation problem that we have been having for many
Because you
decades.
can't close the gap without jobs and without growth.
So what is the new business model here? So we need to be thinking of economies in Latin America that are going to be swiftly moving from being exporters of raw materials and basic products to high-end to basic manufacturing, then to high-end manufacturing. Because if you don't go through this process, where are you going to have all these research and development centers if they're not funded by infrastructure and industry? So you need to start crawling, then walking, then running. So then we need to think about what is the new business model for Latin America. Mexico put a step forward, and now they're regulating all these markets. We're opening up our sectors. We on the growth NAFTA agreement, and then we're swiftly moving to be now. There's a lot of difficulties that we have there. Yes, but at least there's a clear business plan now. All countries need to have a clear idea of what is the business model that they want to get, and how do they incorporate information society? How do they incorporate conservation? How do they incorporate keeping the environment clean and protecting our home? And how we're going to develop all these now. So we need to think globally of what is the right business model and how do we put all these ingredients together, because all of these are parts of the solution, but we need to have a coherent way to organize it.
Right.
I would say that those are all points I agree with. It is not a simple puzzle to solve, but there are great examples of where other, I don't want to say developing, but both developed and developing regions have reached greater levels of productivity and economic growth and wellness and education levels. To me, it's a combination of these things, and that may not be the simple answer, except that none of it really happens without investment, and I mean significant investment. You won't have an improvement in schools. I mean, in Panama, I think bunch of businesses got together and they renovated the schools overnight because it would have taken the government forever. In Chile, where we operate, they have something called Startup Chile, where they're enticing innovative companies to come to Chile, give them visas, capital, just to locate themselves in Chile, which is a very aggressive and successful economy.
Is that working, Mike?
Yeah, it's working incredibly. I mean, why not go to Chile? You get the visa, you get grants from the government, and Santiago becomes Silicon Valley. I mean, we know it works because we've seen Silicon Valley work. So there are models that we should be adopting and thinking about. And I also believe that the region as a whole doesn't have quite as much cross-investment. I mean, Mexico, I think, invests $20 billion a year in Brazil, but Brazil only puts $1 billion in Mexico. Why? Well, it's partially because Brazil's inward focus, but also it was not easy to invest in Mexico until recently. 10 years ago, we exited Latin America, except for Chile. And now we're getting back in because regulatory frameworks are evolving. We see opportunity, as I said, in many places. So it's a combination of things, but it begins, I think, with capital. Capital is generally smart capital, and it flows to those opportunities, those areas where there's a greatest return. There's nothing wrong with, God bless the Pope. There's nothing wrong with return. It's an important thing in our society. Every day we wake up and we think about the things we're going to do and the return we're going to get, personal, health, financial, from those things. So,
but we need to change the structure of the world economy. And one way to achieve that is to focus on these basic resources that our survival as a species depends on, all threatened: water, air, biodiversity. We cannot live more than a few weeks without food. We cannot live without more than a few hours without air. We cannot live more than a few days without water. All these three resources globally are threatened to the point that we know in the year 2050 there is not enough water in the planet for the people that we have in the planet. Not enough water. So our survival is being threatened. What the opportunity this creates and the model of new or the transformative capitalistic model is to create global markets that emulate the carbon market, but for water, for biodiversity, for the oceans, for biodiversity, putting limits in what we use, because we need to put limits, otherwise we're going to die, we're going to disappear as a species, the way we're going, and create markets that put a value on those, because the market prices are the value. That changes the system of values, the way that Alicia is talking about. And that gives you a new model of capitalism, because as you change the markets, and these are markets for global public goods, these are for the global commons, they're very different markets. So this is the tail that wags the dog. As you change the markets and we create these new global institutions, then the tail, which is the new markets, wags the dog. The dog is capitalism, and the capitalism structure is changing. And then you look at the most important inputs of production this century, which are no longer capital. So it doesn't really matter who owns the capital anymore. They are knowledge, as Alicia said, as you said, and the natural resources, water, the atmosphere, the oceans, the atmosphere, and biodiversity. Those are the most important inputs of production.
Are there investment mechanisms in place to encourage the kind of investment that is required to protect the resources that you're talking about?
No.
Well, I think it's not yes and no. It's better than that. You know, one of the things we've been so concerned about our organization is how to reduce greenhouse gases in connection with climate change. And it's been a little bit discouraging in the U.S. because the dialogue in Capitol Hill hasn't gone very well, blah, blah, blah. But lo and behold, some really good things are happening right now. And it's a combination, it's voters, it's governments, and business coming together. Solar prices have fallen by 80%. It's extraordinary. And so you have kind of liberal environmentalists on the East Coast in California who love solar, but TNC is working in places like Georgia with Tea Party folks who want freedom from the grid, so they're motivated by different things. But the technology breakthroughs generated by good government policy and business innovation are bringing people together in this inclusive way to make real progress. There's a lot of stuff happening like that.
That's one of the things we haven't really talked about is the role of politicians, and government in what has gone right and what has gone wrong to date. I mean, if you look at the region, there's haves and have-nots. You know, the haves are Mexico, Colombia, Peru. Governments, you know, in Chile, where the governments have been progressive, they've been deregulating, privatizing, thinking about the macroeconomic issues, their currencies. The governments that are not, Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, where there's inflation, stagnation, you know, they're not thinking about their economies, really their people in the end. I mean, to me, that's also a major issue in the region, is you have haves and have-nots, and we need more haves.
Yeah, and you know, for a long time, Brazil was seen as this great, you know, growth story that so many businesses wanted to invest there. But in the last few years, it has become harder, more expensive for foreign capital to get there. And so it sort of cuts off foreign investment. And so you're looking for this market. You're not going to get it without the investment. Let me ask you, I think the regulatory part of this and the political part of this is so important. Can you, Mike and Jose Manuel, can you go through the areas of the world that you believe actually do offer the best environment for investment right now, when you take into account all that we've been talking about, whether it's education or the regulatory environment? That's where you're going to allocate capital. We're talking all day and every day about Greece and about the Eurozone and the weak story there, and China and the volatility there, and the U.S. sort of stuck in a 2% grower. So where are the most opportunistic areas right now in the world?
Well, I'm an American by nationality, but my business is abroad, so I'm not sure it's here on some level. We are heavily invested in Europe. We have, you know, 20 billion of revenue we generate there every year. And I do feel like the EU, despite the Greece situation, which I hope we don't talk about, has a regulatory framework that's very balanced. It's interesting when you have 27 countries, each of whom have their own points of view, you know, federal views of what they should or shouldn't have and what should or shouldn't happen, coming together in Brussels and actually putting some really good regulation forward in our area in particular, in the telecom and internet space. So for us, that's where we're investing. But we are, as I just said, we have opened up a new frontier just in the last year in Latin America. We have a business, we have $1 billion of revenue down there already, but we think it can be much, much bigger. So we are opening up to this region again in a way that I'm very, very enthusiastic about for many of the reasons we're talking about here. But I'm also sober and realistic about the challenges, which we're also talking about, and I think it's a healthy conversation.
Jose?
It will be just natural that will brag about what is happening in Mexico. And the truth is that 16 constitutional reforms in 16 months was a big achievement of the Mexican government. And there are certainly opportunities in the telecom industry, in the energy industry. For example, today was the first bid of rounds for fields in Mexico for the first time in 76 years. So big changes for us. But apart from Mexico, where are the biggest opportunities, I will say, in the Pacific Rim of Latin America? There's lots of great opportunities. This Alliance of the Pacific has worked very well to become a new center of economic development and political alliances. So for me, the link between the Latin American Pacific and Asia, it's quite a strong link because it just links in terms of regulatory attractiveness, in terms of where the trade of the amount of trade that goes between those sections of the Pacific has grown tremendously. So for me, in terms of regulation, in terms of stability, it will be the most outstanding and the most attractive places for us to invest.
Do these areas align with your motives?
Yeah, I mean, we think about it in a really similar way. Just like Mike and Jose Manuel, we want to do business in places where there are good governments, where the private sector can flourish, where the rules are clear and not changing. Because we're making investments too, and we want to partner with the private sector, and we want to partner with enlightened governments. The thing I would add, though, is when the governments aren't as effective as we would like them to be, then we think both the private sector and nonprofits like us, we have to engage on that too, and help governments get better. Sometimes when we have panels like this, people almost seem to want to think, oh, we can make progress without the government, but at least with our environmental considerations, we can't. So we need good, enlightened governments.
And you need
Mike's
the rule
right.
of law. Rule of law.
Yeah, we need rule of law, and governments get it right, they get it wrong, and so we've got to help governments get it right more often. So we're always encouraging our business allies to help us on that front too.
As we wrap up here, the audience has come to hear some big ideas. I want to ask you all for the next big idea for the Americas. What's yours, Graciela?
The next big idea is, in fact, some of what is happening here today, right now. What was mentioned here is that the US has to go out and has to promote relationship with other nations, as his company is oriented to, and as what he was suggesting and Jose was suggesting in the Pacific area. That's where the opportunity is. The US has to really embrace global leadership and start with the North-South in the Americas, which is what this is about. So that's why I was so keen to come here. I'm very impressed with the leadership and the vision, and yours. What do we have to do? We have to participate in... Look, this moment now is like the moment after World War II, where the Bretton Woods institutions were created that created the globalization we have today. The IMF, the World Bank, the GATT, the WTO, etc. The opportunity to export the most important asset of the United States, which is our institutions, believe it or not. It's not the money, it's the institutions. The opportunity to export those institutions and to get really engaged in a global level, starting from the Americas, North and South, that opportunity is being left aside. This institution represents what should be done, and they should be done globally, starting from the Americas, and it is a fantastic opportunity right now.
Right down the line, big idea for the Americas, Mark.
Big ideas. Nobody's against nature.
No one is.
Somehow we've gotten in this kind of goofy situation where people think protecting nature is somehow at odds with human well-being or economic progress, but that makes no sense. We all can agree, we all want business, government, everybody in this room, we all want healthy air, a stable climate, good food, good water, biodiversity, beautiful places. And there are many, many win-win opportunities if we're smart, where everybody can come together, stop fighting so much. We might need to argue about some things on the side, but in the main, we can agree and put our heads together, making progress and getting on with it right now.
Come together. Alicia.
I would stick with the issue of how do you generate a learning society and how do you take advantage of the demographic bonus. It's only a window of opportunity that we have in the coming years. That will go away and could be a huge problem for all of the region, not only in terms of productivity and prosperity, but in terms of security. So for me, it's a challenge, but at the same time, it's a huge opportunity. For me, it's an urgent opportunity to tackle on it. You know? So it'll boil down, after I've said that, in terms of how do you generate talented youth in Latin America to move the agenda forward.
Educate the people.
How do you inspire youth in Latin America to transform society in Latin America, to believe that they can be different? I think one of the issues in Latin America has to be the issue of believing that you can transform societies. There's a huge gap between what you think in a country and a society that barely meets basic needs to a society that is always striving to be better and use technology and progress.
That's the first step. Believe in it.
Believe in it.
Yeah.
And so,
Jose Manuel.
Yes, I will just follow one of Mark's ideas. Is I think there's three things a country needs to foster investments and to develop infrastructure and to create more business, which is you need an open economy. Second, you need cheap and well-educated labor. And third, you need access to cheap energy. So if this region in the world can actually become the powerhouse of something, is the powerhouse of energy. Canada, the US, and Mexico could together become the powerhouse of energy of the world, shifting a lot of the geopolitical power from the Middle East to this side. This will give us tremendous amount of potential for growth, not only for the NAFTA region, but for the southern cone as well. We want, everybody in this room, we want a full continent, the full Americas, to be a well-developed society and to have growing economies. That will be very healthy for the environment. That will be very healthy for the economy. But so for me, the single key idea is let's start by step number one, which is let's give all these countries cheap, affordable energy which can boost their
By the way,
economies.
do you think there's enough oil in the world?
Absolutely yes. And
Yes.
I'll say yes. My answer
too
is
much.
yes. And why? And why?
Yeah. And this is important because I'm looking at where the price is and we're talking
Yes.
about more Iran oil coming on. You think there is enough oil in the global market?
There is a lot of oil down there. Normally, oil companies, if we're very successful from a field, we get 15 to 20% out of the resources that are actually there. And what actually stops us from getting the 80% is technology.
Yeah.
We have seen a great energy revolution in this country, which is the US, which is in 10 years, they became a powerhouse in energy because they just used new technology in old fields, and they suddenly become one of the largest exporter of energy in the world.
Yeah.
Now, so it's not the resources that are under the limitation, it's the technology to access those resources.
Somebody said to me the other day, Marie, you can eat on the floor in my auto shop right now because gone are the days when there's grease everywhere and, because it's all technology-based.
Exactly.
Well, what you are saying is so critical because CO2 in the atmosphere is used to enhance oil production, as you know. That's a tertiary enhanced oil recovery, which is what you're talking, which is what Mexico needs because of the somewhat exhausted oil deposits that we have there. So that's a very good example of how to take CO2 from the atmosphere and to bring it to produce more petroleum, and some of the CO2 remains in the oil well, so therefore it cleans the atmosphere at the same time. That is the technology you are talking about. However, there is one thing, if I had to choose one single point to emphasize is, let's build carbon negative power plants in Latin America.
Absolutely.
With the funding from the carbon market of the Kyoto Protocol, which is already there, $350 billion a year. Every dollar is through the CDM used for projects of that nature.
These are the kinds of ideas that are coming out of this conference right now. Mike Fries, end us on your big idea, please.
Okay. Well, I suppose I'll end where I began on one hand, one level, which is my big idea would be is something that would enable everything you all want to achieve. And we know that it's enabled change on extraordinary levels in government, in innovation, in products and services, in technology, in productivity, in happiness, and that is connectivity. When you're not connected, imagine and many of you are on your phones now, I can see it. When no one can actually imagine a time when they didn't have ubiquitous connectivity.
Yeah.
When you put a cell phone or a smartphone in the hand of someone in Latin America, they use it just like they do here. 95% enjoy social media. They're on Google. When you put a television or digital television in front of them, they watch more television than Americans. It is a proven path to change, to incredible development, and it's going to happen. And companies like ours, we hope, will be part of that. Others will be part of it too. And it requires regulatory change. It requires, friendly environments, rule of law, things of that nature. But it's going to be powerful. There are 600 million people who, well, let me say it differently. 60% of households in Latin America don't have internet. They don't actually go home and go online with their iPads or phones. Imagine the educational opportunities, just the knowledge. You talk about knowledge. There is no knowledge without sharing of information and data. So to me, that is the most important idea, certainly one that we're going to try to take advantage of and will enable everybody else's great ideas.
And I think
without a fee. It won't charge you anything.
when you look at the fact that there is 7 billion mobile phones in the world and 1 billion PCs. You see where things are going. Ladies and gentlemen, obviously great opportunity. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.